My name is Rian van Square, and I would like to welcome you to the Business Travel 360 podcast, In Conversation With, where we speak with travel industry movers and shakers that are transforming business travel. This podcast is designed so you can gain insights into the company they represent and learn how they are capitalizing on the future of travel. In this episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Alice Ferrari, the CEO at Kyte. Alice is not always in the spotlight within our industry, but in my opinion, executing substantial influence in how, especially corporate travel, is accessing and buying low-cost carrier travel. I'm therefore looking forward to this interview so we can expose what she's getting done at Kyte some more. Alice, just an upfront thank you for giving Business Travel 360 your time today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Alice. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kyte. I'm an airline girl. That's how I like to define myself. I have a master's from Cranfield University, which is a leading university in aviation studies. Anyone who's in the industry would recognize the name. And I did a master's in airline management. And then I started my career now 12 years ago at easyJet, where I was fortunate enough to spend time with the ops leadership team, where I basically held a development role working with the operations senior management. And I was exposed to a lot of the work we were doing, bringing technical and more digital initiatives into operations. And that's where I developed an interest for the opportunities that technology could bring in developing the airline industry. So then I joined Founders Factory, that is a venture studio based in London that actually takes investments from a number of corporates, and easyJet was one of them. And their investment represented the travel tech sector. And Founders Factory would go out and invest and create startups that were travel tech related, that were strategic both for easyJet, but also could become really successful businesses as concepts. And I spent 2 years there developing travel tech startups, both in the accelerator program where we would invest and the venture studio especially. And as part of the venture studio, we were looking at how NDC was evolving. This was late 2018. And we were looking at ways to make airline distribution and airline APIs easier and more efficient to consume. So that's how the concept of Kyte came about. And then I was offered the opportunity by Founders Factory, my employer at the time, to go and develop a business around it, which is how I ended up becoming Kyte's co-founder.
That is an incredible story. I didn't realize all of that with regards to how it actually came about, but that's phenomenal. You basically got to walk the talk, right? Literally, you came up with an idea and they said, okay, go ahead and do it.
Exactly. It was a combined effort. So
Sure.
There was a product team at the time, but then I was really excited about the idea and always had in mind to start something myself, although I didn't know how difficult it would be, and decided that was the opportunity, that was the right time. Little did I know that the pandemic was going to hit a couple of months later. That's another story. And went on to develop this concept. Of course, the foundation is still how it is today.
I mean, I did a little bit of homework and I note that you mentioned you did that master's in air transport management, but your thesis there was based around the restructuring of a business plan for the then Alitalia, who has now subsequently not survived and it's been revived within ITA. But, this was back in 2013. So here's a bit of a cheeky question. Would they still have been around if they adopted your plan?
This question makes me laugh. So I think Alitalia actually has come back in many incarnations. And if you like, today, ITA is its latest incarnation. So it still is around. Sadly, they didn't adopt what was a pretty common solution back in previous decades, where full service airlines were suffering significantly from the expansion of low cost airlines. And my suggestion for Alitalia at the time was to focus on long haul and let a new airline with a lower cost base and a more flexible structure compete on the short haul. Obviously, Italy being dominated by low-cost carriers. That was quite a difficult strategy, but one that, for example, was very successful with the Lufthansa Group, where they really focus a lot on their network and their hub and spoke, whereas a lot of the domestic and the European is covered by Eurowings today. Alitalia had an opportunity to do that with Air One, but actually decided to focus more on short haul and cancelled a lot of the long haul flights. And that's where a lot of the problems lie today, not to mention politics, corruption,
Yes,
and
a few other things, of course. Now, sorry, that was a bit of a cheeky question. And just to add to that, if Ash was listening in on this interview, he would want us to, when we say ITA Airways, you have to say inspired by Alitalia, because that's the tagline they actually start using as well. And you see they print that on the plane.
There's a lot of Alitalia branding
Yes.
still. They have a lot of their aircraft. People do wonder, they're wondering why they're flying ITA, but actually on Alitalia branded metal.
Let's get back to some of the more serious questions. So, Kyte, it's been in the news quite a lot, and we're going to mention a recent interview you did as well, which I would encourage people to see. We'll mention that in a minute. Kyte has been increasingly in the news. We've been covering it quite a lot in our weekly Business Travel 360 podcast as well. But yet, I still run into people who don't know about Kyte or don't know what they are. So let's just clear that up. Can you describe Kyte to me and tell us what it is?
So I think the best way to describe Kyte is that we offer a standardized API platform for airlines to connect to any travel company and to connect directly. Today, for travel companies wanting to access content directly from airlines, there are a number of solutions. One of them is, of course, the GDSs, which I refer to as intermediaries. The other solution is to connect via APIs, but we know that this solution is quite laborious, expensive, resource intensive, and not every airline is available to offer their API to just any travel company. And then there are the aggregators that sort of also tend to disintermediate the agency from the airline. So we wanted to create an API solution that would deliver the same benefits of doing a direct connect between a travel company and an airline, but through our API, which is obviously a one-to-many, standardized and quite efficient to integrate because of its more modern architecture and technology.
I guess it also goes without saying that typically airlines aren't necessarily IT or API people. They are focused on running their airlines. So this must be a welcome solution for you as well, or a welcome opportunity to be realized. But I love the fact that you are saying standardized there. That is obviously, in our current fragmented industry, very important. I love the fact that you've said that a few times now, that it's a standardized API. So one of them is obviously been in the news quite a bit recently was for Ryanair, because the Ryanair distribution strategy, as a result, it's been noticeable how much more in control they are of that distribution strategy as a result. How difficult was that to get done and delivered for Ryanair?
You probably know this yourself. No sales cycle with an airline is ever easy. But taking a step back, we decided to focus on low-cost carriers. First of all, because our infrastructure allowed for it. Our first two pilot airlines were British Airways and easyJet. And therefore, from day one, built in the API, the flexibility to accommodate for the two different flows, NDC and proprietary LCC. And then what we realized that actually low-cost carriers, by the way, are the fastest growing market segment today. We're being slightly overlooked by the whole NDC movement. When it comes to third-party distribution, the solutions are very much centered around NDC, because a lot of aggregators are very much NDC-centric. And then there are the traditional GDSs whose business model clearly doesn't really align with cost carriers because of their margins, because of the higher costs. And as a result, there isn't really an easy way to access a low-cost content for travel agencies. So how did we get to Ryanair? The catalyst actually was when Ryanair made the announcement in late 2022 that they were going back on to Amadeus. And that's how I decided to approach them and ask them how come they had decided to reinstate this channel. And they said that with the economic crisis and the increases in fares, more corporates were probably going to look at low-cost content. But actually, it's not just price that drives business travel to look into low-cost content. It's also the frequencies, it's also the coverage. And we've seen a lot of that in the last few years. So that's how we said, well, great. And I think this is a good moment to go back onto third-party distribution. But what about API distribution? The industry is moving towards APIs or NDC. And actually, there are a number of aggregators out there that are scraping your content anyway. So that's how the conversation came about. Obviously took another year and a half to then get them signed up and live. But that was the catalyst, essentially, that got us going with that conversation.
Okay, great. And there's a bit more detail available on a recent interview you did with Business Travel News Europe about this history with Ryanair. It's quite a fascinating read. So if people have time, they can always go there and see that as well. We just want to go back into some of your career history. You talk a little bit about your time spent at easyJet. What was the most interesting thing you've learned during your time at easyJet?
So easyJet is a great place to start your career. It's a relatively flat structure. Even as a junior analyst, which is how I started, started, I was really exposed to a lot of the work that was happening, even at senior level. And that's how drives interest for people, because you are aware what your work is being used for and the impact of your work. I think the flat structure is something that I want to continue to use in my company today. Some transparency really motivates people to be productive. The other great learning from easyJet was simplicity, and the low-cost model anyway evolves around simplicity, stripping out a lot of the complexity that comes with running an airline. Single fleet, no frequent flyer program, a standard model that can be used across the network, whether you're in Gatwick, which is the beating heart of easyJet, or in a remote island in Greece.
I love that. I just wrote it down. Transparency drives motivation. I love that statement. And you're right. Applying the simplicity of their offering and the simplicity of what they sell to the customer, but also applying that internally obviously makes a lot of sense, right? If you were a very complex and deep layered organization trying to sell something simple, you will fail. In my area, corporate travel and TMCs that I work with every day, here's a question to you, a very simple question. Why are we finding it such a challenge amongst many TMCs to sell and service LCCs effectively?
That's actually not a very simple question.
Let's pretend it is.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to hear your perspective on this as well. I think what we've seen is that it is difficult for TMCs, and particularly offline and corporate travel sellers who tend to book travel in the GDS environment, to access multiple options when it comes to low-cost content. Because as mentioned before, the low-cost model and the GDS model aren't really aligned. Low-cost airlines don't really want to pay for distribution, and surcharging their content in order to recover that cost means that those fares may no longer be as competitive as they would like them to be.
That makes perfect sense. Now, since we've structured these questions, because you and I have been trying to sit down for this interview for some time, things have evolved, and things are evolving really fast these days in corporate travel. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but things are moving ahead quite a lot. We are definitely seeing this mentioning of GDS-centric processes within TMCs are getting a lot of attention. People are asking, what can I do to be not so dependent on that process, but use a GDS for what it's good for and use another process for what that's good for, and so on. And so I think we will see, and we are seeing definitely, an increase amongst TMCs booking low cost, because something else you've mentioned, which remains true since the pandemic, is that more and more corporates are flying low cost carriers because it makes sense, especially with a short business trip. It's no problem at all. Now, your API provides the carrier with the control to decide who they want to deploy that to. And we've seen that. I mentioned we've been talking about the Ryanair distribution strategy, and they keep saying we've now picked the next OTA to work with or the next supplier to work with, and it gives them the control, which is critical. Is there an opportunity, despite the clashing business model, let's take that out of the equation, but is there a technical opportunity for a GDS to consume the Kyte API for an airline like Ryanair?
Absolutely. And this is something that has been talked about in the past with 2 out of the 3 leading GDSs. On the flip side, low-cost carriers wanting to enter into the corporate travel space do need to have fundamental functionalities that today most of them lack of. And that's why also there is a limitation in TMC adoption. One of them is the servicing, which is clearly very limited or non-existent when it comes to low-cost carriers, whether they're on the GDSs or not. There is not much flexibility around change, and any change would have to be done on the airlines.com rather than in the platform that the agent is using. And that does bring some challenges to agents. The other element that is also limiting adoption for now is certain products that may be more appealing to the business travelers, certain corporate bundles, certain offerings. And to some extent, some airlines are doing that. easyJet has a bundle that is only on the API, so it's catered for the business traveler and agents. That is the inclusive fare, which basically offers more ancillaries and more flexibility without having to choose choose a certain bundle that would also include checked bag that sometimes is not as useful for a business traveler. So there is some intent there from some low-cost carriers. I would love to see more of that. And I think that would really promote the adoption amongst TMCs.
It sounds to me like there's a bit of compromise all around that needs to be made in the GDSs with the business model, with the airline perhaps around servicing ability in the API, and with the TMC around just a slightly different process, but it means they can offer their customers what they want. And perhaps even for the business traveler to realize they can't be as demanding or expectant of a LCC when it comes to the bundles and that sort of stuff. And then we'll have a win-win situation all around. Just on the current topic of, asking you cheeky questions, what is next for Kyte?
What I can say is that I'm extremely fascinated by airline retailing, and obviously that's high on the agenda of any airline, pushed by IATA's One Order project, but also some leading airlines and some leading tech players, for example, TP Connects, Flyer, and even Retail Air. What we've built at Kyte is sort of aligned to what airline retailing will look like in the next few years. We really want to be a key component to driving airline retailing forward. And we don't envisage ourselves just being an API platform, although we really want to perfection that before expanding into other functionalities. But the sort of longer term goal is very much aligned to airline retailing and how the industry is moving.
I really like that answer. And I think we should have a follow-up conversation about that one, especially bringing in the reseller or the seller channel views or expectations around that. I'm a firm believer that there's not enough dialogue happening between airlines and sellers about their retail ambitions and what it's going to mean and what's the impact, etc. And there's also huge opportunity for cooperation between those, because a key element of successful retailing is knowing the customer very well, and the sellers tend to know their customers very well, and they can cooperate quite nicely.
You did hit the nail on the head, and there's two elements that are extremely important that Kyte wants to obviously play to. One is the data, the quality of the data, and how it can help airlines predict what a certain customer may want, even if they're not booking through a direct channel. And the second part is technology enablement. Often airlines have great ideas and great retailing strategies, but then the limitation hits when you look at your current technical capabilities. And so we want to be an enhancer for that rather than a limitation.
When we set these questions up last year, we were busy, and Cedar Hall and myself, we did a series of posts around a bunch of questions we kept on asking, is it relevant? And we were asking questions about certain industry practices that we keep doing today because, that's the way it's been done and that's just how it is and all that sort of stuff. And, you are, I don't want to say new, but relatively new, certainly young into the industry. Even if people like myself, who's been in the industry for 3+ decades, ask questions like, why are we doing this? My question to you is, what, in your opinion, is an example of such a practice? What stands out for you in our industry is, and you can only name one, you're not allowed to name more than one, top one that you say, is this still relevant? Really, why are we doing it?
This is a hard one. I did think about it. It just took me back to my last flight when I saw the stewardesses showing how to fasten the seatbelt. And I just thought to myself, gosh, is there really someone on this plane who still doesn't know how to fasten the seatbelt? There might be, and safety first. So I don't know how politically correct that view is, especially coming from someone who has to travel quite a lot. I did wonder if that is still a useful practice.
It's an interesting answer. I wasn't expecting you to give me such a practical, example, because the kind of stuff we were talking about was, for instance, coupons to an e-ticket and all that stuff. But this is a very interesting one. I mean, I'll give you a similar one from my side. Why do we have non-smoking signs on the aircraft? And brand new aircraft gets delivered, it still has the non-smoking sign up. I see some of the Middle Eastern carriers, instead of the non-smoking, they do a no mobile device. That makes sense, right? So non-smoking, I mean, honestly, that is unbelievable. Yeah, I just want to ask you, do you have any questions for me? I'm in the seller channel. I'm in the TMC channel. You're on the airline side. Do you have a question for me?
Yes, I do. And the question really is, why do you think it takes so long for TMCs or travel sellers to adopt new technology platform and actually then start using it full capacity? What we see is we work with a number of players, for example, Air Gateway, who deliver a agent desktop to their customers. They consume our API for low cost. So their 400 plus customers have access to our low cost content. And there is a really long period of time between the first booking and them rolling that out to all their offices and rolling that out to the full capacity of which they should be booking. And it's extremely frustrating for everyone, including our partner airlines, who keep asking us, well, why aren't they booking? Why haven't they moved? I would love to know from someone who is more in the trenches, why?
I need to be careful with my answer here. I had a big bunch of hair on my head before I started working in the travel space. No, that's not the correct answer. I should have this printed out behind me. To instill change in TMC space is probably one of the most difficult missions one can try and achieve. I think there's a few reasons for it. One, a lot of TMCs have been reliant on suppliers of technology to them where they gave it to them on a plate, and they've become accustomed to that scenario, and they've become used to the technology as supplied to us. And if something comes from the outside doesn't fit into that, I can't use it. And there's a lot of dependency on those. And I'm not saying what those are, but I think you know what I mean. And there's a lot of dependencies around those. Now, I see a lot of agents waking up to that because there are entrants into the market now, back office suppliers, for instance, that don't rely on traditional handoffs from a GDS, for instance, that can be more open, and that allows them to add other processes to their channel. So that's a good thing. But that's one of the key reasons. The other reason is there is so much change that's always happening in travel. I think a lot of agents remain skeptical about new things, and they will wait and see. There's so much change all the time in travel that they go, oh, we've seen this before, might not work, etc. But then I think that the third reason, and this is where a gateway has been quite successful in my opinion, is that the entrants to the market tend to ignore and turn a blind eye or say, you don't need this, you don't need that, to some of the requirements of the agent. Simple little things. One of the key examples we tell agents about, for instance, Air Gateway, is that they've paid attention to the fact that agents need visibility on ticket coupons for NDC bookings. It's a vital component. And a lot of the other suppliers go, oh, you don't need that, it's fine. So paying attention to the needs of the agency will also help. We can see that because, as you know, Air Gateway is quite successful. You know, I go back to my statement that instilling change in travel is difficult, but there is a lot of hope and there's a lot of silver linings around a lot of grey clouds these days. And of course, the customer is more demanding and wants to book what they want to book with their preferred seller. I think you'll see an acceleration, especially with the kind of tech that you guys are providing, the kind of user interfaces that the likes of Air Gateway is providing, and the fact that the agents are more and more used to, can't be the same as it's been for the last 20 years. We have to change and adopt to better ways to work.
100%. There is a lot of interesting innovation. And I think now more than ever, there is real motivation even from all stakeholders. And I was actually very interested in your second perspective here. It's a new perspective for me. You're right. Agents and travel companies could be quite skeptical when there's so many different new solutions and they actually want to try it out or make sure it's actually going to stay before getting used to new ways of working. That's a very interesting new perspective for me. So thank you.
Alice, that is a wrap. Fantastic series of answers from you. I thoroughly enjoy that. So thank you so much. Thank you from Business Travel 360 for your time.
Thank you on behalf of Kyte and myself for having us. And thank you for the great questions.